They logged it as an artifact before the scan completed. From the Council Command dais, the Titan-class warship rotated slowly against the starfield, its silhouette blunt and unapologetic. Armor plates overlapped in visible seams, kinetic apertures broke the hull's clean lines like industrial scars. There were no radiant veins, no harmonic glow, no ceremonial symmetry. The admirals watched the model resolve and permitted themselves a moment of shared amusement. This was not how a modern power announced itself. Sensor officers spoke with professional detachment that edged into disdain. External mass registered at 18.4 million tons. Internal volume suggested compartmentalization rather than unified field structures. Power emissions were mechanical, steady, inelegant. One analyst highlighted the absence of an active energy lattice and was rewarded with a ripple of soft laughter. Another counted 48 spinal ports and classified them as projectile launchers. Obsolete, inefficient, logistically naive. A relic, an admiral said, and the designation propagated through the chamber. They widened the scan cone and found the rest of humanity's presence. 67 ships scattered across 2.6 million kilometers, their signatures muted, their spacing irregular. No escorts in parade formation, no layered screens. The dispersion was read as fear or incompetence. Council doctrine preferred elegance, curved arcs, mutual support, visual dominance. What they saw instead looked like a mistake preserved by stubbornness. Processible. The classification stamped itself onto the tactical display, reducing the unknown polity to timelines and yields. Projections populated automatically. Compliance achieved in under 6 minutes. Crew neutralization without hull loss. Reclamation quotas updated for labor and materials. The numbers were clean, reassuring. A junior tactician flagged an anomaly in the Titan's approach vector. The ship was closing without deceleration, crossing markers faster than models predicted. The system annotated the speed with a warning glyph reserved for sensor error. The alert was dismissed. Physics did not bend for primitive construction. They studied the hull in more detail, curiosity replacing amusement. The armor's layering was strange. Voids between plates wider than structural necessity, cavities that interrupted scan coherence. One admiral suggested poor manufacturing tolerances. Another suggested cultural superstition, neither considered design intent. The Titan did not maneuver to avoid the growing council perimeter. It did not broadcast identity or intent. It held vector, mass forward, armor square to the fleet. At 1.1 million kilometers, its power curve remained flat, stubbornly low, as if conserving something rather than lacking it. Too crude to matter. The phrase appeared as a private note on an auxiliary display, never meant for record. Orders flowed without urgency. Picket cruisers were assigned observation roles. A demonstration volley was scheduled for when range closed to 18,000 kilometers. Energy output capped at 15% to avoid unnecessary destruction. The Council preferred lessons to massacres when dealing with undeveloped polities. One elder strategist lingered on the Titan's stillness. The ship neither flinched nor adjusted as targeting brackets settled around it. It did not perform the small, instinctive corrections common to crews expecting fire. It simply came on, as if mass and time were allies rather than constraints. The strategist said nothing. In doubt without proof was unprofessional. Around them, the command chamber returned to its comfortable rhythms, data scrolling, predictions updating, authority unchallenged. The galaxy had seen this pattern countless times. An unrefined arrival, a brief correction, order restored. Behind the mockery and the certainty, the Titan crossed another marker, silent and heavy, and the Council finalized its decision. Whatever humanity was, it would be processed. They spoke as if obedience were inevitable. Council first contact protocols activated at 420,000 kilometers, flooding the Titan's approach vector with layered hails. Authority statements rendered, informal cadence, each clause citing precedent, each demand framed as benevolent inevitability. The Council did not threaten. It informed. Submission was presented as efficiency. One unclassified vessel against a perimeter of 10,000 hulls, order versus waste. The Titan did not answer. It continued on vector, speed unchanged, armor square to the fleet. Distance counters ticked down with irritating regularity. 380,000 kilometers, 50,000. A senior envoy authorized escalation to mandatory compliance framing. The language shifted from courtesy to instruction. Acknowledge in 180 seconds. Disarm in 360. Prepare for boarding in 600. The timelines appeared in bold across auxiliary displays, the familiar comfort of procedure. The reply arrived at 142 seconds. It cut through council harmonics with blunt priority, narrow band and undecorated. No anthem. No emblem. The visual resolved into a functional bridge, dark surfaces, hard lines, stations arranged for reach rather than display. A human officer stood centered, hands clasped behind their back, posture relaxed, eyes steady. No visible rank. "We acknowledge receipt," the officer said. "Your assumptions are incorrect." A ripple of disbelief passed through the chamber. An admiral leaned forward, amused, and reiterated the council's authority, rotating the schematic that showed the disparity in clean numbers. 10,000 council vessels, 1 Titan, 67 distant contacts, scattered without formation. The human officer did not glance at it. "We are not petitioning," the officer said. "We are not negotiating inclusion. We are informing you that your authority does not apply. Does not apply." Translation checks ran twice. The phrasing held. The council pivoted to legal doctrine, invoking classifications for undeclared polities and the corrective necessity of processing non-compliant populations. The human officer inclined their head slightly, a gesture that read as acknowledgement rather than concession. "We crossed interstellar space under our own power more than 2 centuries ago," they said. "We are not undeclared, and we do not kneel. Do not kneel." Silence followed, brief and heavy. An admiral laughed, sharp and dismissive, and authorized the countdown marker to appear in the human feed. The numerals began to fall, 300, 299. 298, at 240, the human officer spoke again. "This is your final opportunity to disengage," they said. "Withdraw beyond 1.2 million kilometers. Power down offensive systems. We will not pursue." "And if we refuse?" the envoy asked, irritation edging their voice. "Then you will learn why our ships look the way they do." The Titan close to 300,000 kilometers. Its hull details sharpened, layered plates, recessed voids, mechanical seams unhidden. Power curves remained flat, stubbornly low. No shield bloom, no evasive adjustment. At 180, Council doctrine required a final compliance prompt. It transmitted, automatically, stripped of nuance. The human officer waited until the last word rendered, then closed their eyes for a fraction of a second, as if ending a routine briefing. "We do not kill prisoners," they said. "Plan accordingly." The channel closed. Across the tactical display, the 67 distant human signatures adjusted vectors by fractions of a degree. Acceleration profiles began to rise, smooth and synchronized. The council logged the motion. His indecision, a belated attempt to flee. Orders to fire queued without urgency. Authority had been declared. Refusal recorded. The council believed the matter settled. The first volley was calibrated to teach, not to destroy. Council gunnery officers selected 3 cruisers on the forward arc and authorized a demonstration. Strike at 18,000 kilometers, energy output capped at 15%. The beams lanced out in perfect coherence, spectra tuned to overload any known defensive lattice. In the command chamber, admirals watched with the practiced calm of repetition, waiting for shield bloom and structural failure. The beams struck the Titan and vanished, not deflected. Not scattered. Absorbed. Light washed across layered armor plates and drained into the voids between them, disappearing as if poured into depthless reservoirs. Thermal spikes registered across the hull, then flattened within 0.9 seconds. Radiation, bleed-through, fell below background. The Titan's power curve did not flare or dip. It remained a stubborn, horizontal line. No effect. Analysts reran the data. A second volley followed immediately, this time from 6 cruisers, output raised to 30%, and frequencies staggered to induce resonance collapse. The Titan did not maneuver. It did not raise shields. It held vector and took the fire squarely, armor blackening in controlled patterns as outer layers ablated and vented heat by design. Efficiency calculations populated the displays. In 91.6% absorption. Revised to 92.2 as additional telemetry resolved. The number stabilized and refused to move. Murmurs crept through the chamber. An admiral ordered escalation. 12 ships fired at 45%. Then a battleship-class emitter joined at 60, exceeding peacetime tolerances. For 3.1 seconds, the battle space was nothing but glare. Energy bright enough to cast hard shadows across Council hulls thousands of kilometers away. When the light cleared, the Titan was still there. Entire armor sections had sloughed away, peeling off in sheets that tumbled harmlessly into space. Beneath them, identical layers remained intact, aligned, unhurried. Internal temperature graphs peaked and fell in clean cycles. Crew life signs held steady. No decompression, no loss of attitude control. It did nothing. The line slipped from a junior officer before discipline caught it. It was logged anyway, flagged as emotional variance. At 70% output, Council weapons began to strain. Emitter housings overheated. Containment fields wavered. One cruiser broke formation to vent plasma, filing a damage report that cited thermal overload during sustained fire. The cause field auto-populated. Target resistance. The irony went unremarked. The admirals ordered a pause to reconfigure firing solutions, irritation now visible. During the lull, long-range sensors updated. The 67 distant human signatures, previously dismissed as background clutter, shifted vectors by measurable margins. Acceleration profiles rose smoothly, not in spikes, but in ramps. Distances began to close from 6 million kilometers to 2.3. Council analysts tagged the movement as evasive repositioning, a belated attempt to disengage. The Titan transmitted a single data burst, unencrypted and narrow band. Impact graphs filled Council displays. Absorption curves overlaid firing profiles with clinical clarity. A short line of text sat beneath them, time-stamped and unadorned. Efficiency acceptable. Silence spread through the chamber. One final demonstration volley was authorized at 80% to end the anomaly and reassert control. As capacitors, charged, an elder strategist studied the absorption curve, the way it flattened regardless of input, and felt the first true unease of the engagement. Weapons were meant to provoke reactions, flares, maneuvers, collapse. This target did none of those things. Across the void, the Titan held course, armor still steaming faintly, as if inviting the Council to continue proving the same point. They did not evade the next strike. They advanced. As Council capacitors reached 80% output, the Titan's drive curve changed, not with a flare or surge, but with a steady climb that sensors initially rejected as error. Acceleration ticked, past 6G, then 8, then crossed thresholds long marked unsurvivable. The system recalibrated twice before accepting the value. Sustained thrust stabilized at 12G, 12G. At that acceleration, doctrine said, crews liquefied and hulls tore themselves apart. The Titan closed from 18,000 kilometers to 14,500 in seconds, vector precise, profile unwavering. Life signs remained flat. Structural stress stayed within margins that Council engineers insisted could not exist. The ship did not jink or spiral. It shortened the distance as if distance were an inconvenience, not a barrier. Then the rest of the human fleet moved. 67 signatures flared across the tactical display, each entering its own acceleration ramp. None matched another. Vectors diverged, crossed, and recombined with unsettling precision. The dispersion pattern mocked earlier resolved into intent. These ships had not been scattered. They had been placed. Council formation algorithms struggled to adapt. Human vessels slid through volumes declared unsafe by every tactical manual, passing within tens of kilometers of Council hulls at relative velocities that stripped sensor vanes and scorched armor without a single shot fired. Timing offsets measured in milliseconds prevented collisions while forcing Council ships into corrective maneuvers that conflicted across the line. Closing fast, distance counters fell. 12,000 kilometers, 9,600, 7,100. Fire control solutions lagged, as targeting systems chased acceleration profiles that did not spike or decay. At 12G, the humans did not outrun Council weapons. They outran the assumptions those weapons were built on. A Council cruiser broke formation to regain spacing and found a human destroyer already occupying the vector it needed, sliding past its bow with meters to spare. Another attempted to tighten its arc and clipped an ally's shield envelope, forcing both ships to veer and opening a gap that 3 human frigates exploited immediately. The battle space lost symmetry. Elegant arcs collapsed into crowded volumes of intersecting threat envelopes. The Titan cut thrust at 4,000 kilometers and pivoted broadside in a maneuver that should have sheared it apart. Inertial dampening held. Velocity bled off in a controlled burn that placed the ship squarely across the projected paths of 3 Council command cruisers at once. Gunnery crews fired on reflex. Beams carved through empty space where the Titan had been half a second earlier. An elder strategist saw it then. The humans were not collapsing formations with fire, they were collapsing them with timing. Every acceleration ramp, every cutoff, every fractional degree adjustment forced the Council to react, and reaction stacked errors faster than doctrine could correct them. Space shrank. Options vanished. At 3,000 kilometers, the human fleet settled into geometry Council models flagged as unstable and fatal. Weapon ports irised open along the Titan's spine, dark, mechanical, unapologetic. Across the display, Council, command ships found themselves bracketed by converging vectors they could not escape without colliding with their own escorts. No room left. Orders followed in rapid contradiction. Hold formation, spread out, advance, withdraw. Compliance with any one command violated the others. The humans issued no new signals. They did not taunt. They simply held position, acceleration steady, timing exact. The distance counters stabilized, lines locked into place. The Council had trusted space to protect it. In that moment it learned that space favored those who understood mass and velocity, and were willing to use both without hesitation. The first kill was logged before it was felt. Human fire control converged on 3 Council command ships, trapped inside 3,000 kilometers, their elegant hulls struggling to reorient without colliding with escorts. The humans did not hurry. They waited for certainty. Vectors aligned. Relative velocities stabilized. Probability bands narrowed until error fell below tolerance. Then the Titan's spinal railguns fired. There was no flash, no warning glow, just mass released at speed. 6 tungsten penetrators left the rails at a measured fraction of light speed, spaced 0. 14 seconds apart to defeat predictive interception. Council sensors registered impacts before crews understood weapons had discharged. The first rod punched through layered shielding and ignored it, momentum carrying straight through the forward hull of a command cruiser. The second followed the same path with trivial deviation. Pressure collapsed, power grids failed in sequence, the ship split along stress lines never meant to bear such force. 1. Missiles followed, not as a wave, but as arithmetic. Human destroyers. Launched them in packets of 7, each missile running a distinct guidance logic. Some burned hot and obvious, drawing point defense fire. Others coasted cold, invisible until terminal phase. Council interceptors chased the loud decoys and congratulated themselves as green markers flashed. The quiet missiles arrived untouched. At 2,600 kilometers, a second command vessel attempted a rotation maneuver to shield its core. Overcorrected under conflicting orders and exposed its ventral plane. 3 railgun rounds arrived through that opening. A fourth struck milliseconds, later, delayed by design to exploit the sudden pressure differential. The gravity ring sheared free and continued spinning, intact and useless, while the rest of the ship collapsed inward. Life signs dropped from 9,214 to 0 in under 5 seconds. 2. Council admirals shouted for withdrawal corridors, but geometry no longer permitted them. Human ships occupied the vectors required to escape, holding position with calm precision. The third command vessel fired wildly, energy lances splashing across empty space as gunners tried to force an opening. A human cruiser answered with missiles, carrying limited-yield nuclear charges, detonated at calculated standoff distances. The blasts were shaped and directional, tuned to crush sensor arrays and fracture hull integrity without vaporizing the ship outright. The command vessel went dark. Structure remained mostly intact. Systems died in layers. Human targeting solutions dropped it from the kill list. We count before we fire. The phrase appeared on a Council auxiliary channel, flagged as a human doctrinal artifact. Analysts barely noticed. Too much else was failing. Council escorts attempted to screen remaining leadership ships, but the screen dissolved under kinetic pressure. Railgun fire did not saturate. It selected. Each shot removed a ship that mattered, flag bridges, coordination hubs, logistics nodes, while lesser vessels were ignored long enough to understand what was happening. At 2,100 kilometers, a cluster of Council cruisers attempted a ramming maneuver against a human destroyer, desperate to trade mass for disruption. The destroyer adjusted thrust by 0.3 G, slid aside, and let the cruisers collide with one another. Human sensors logged the impact as environmental hazard neutralization. No shots were fired. The battle clock crossed 24 minutes. Council command coherence fell below 50%. Fleet-wide orders degraded into local guesses and shouted corrections. Human losses remained unchanged. 0 destroyed hulls, 2 damaged, none mission killed. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns. Railgun rounds expended, 41. Missiles launched, 128. Command vessels destroyed. 2. Disabled for capture. 1. The Titan transmitted a status burst, unencrypted. Primary command neutralized, it read. Secondary actions authorized. Resistance collapsed unevenly after that. Some Council captains fought on, firing until emitters overheated or hulls failed under cumulative stress. Others powered down and broadcast surrender codes across every channel they could access. Human systems acknowledged each signal automatically, marking surrendered ships in green and excluding them from targeting solutions without delay. At 31 minutes, the firing slowed. Not because targets were gone, but because the math was finished. The remaining Council fleet floated in disordered clusters, leaderless, weapons cooling, damage reports cascading faster than they could be read. Human ships held position, railguns silent, missiles cold. Boarding craft remained docked. Across the void, wreckage drifted where command had once imposed certainty. The Council had built its power on spectacle and inevitability. It lost both, to accounting. The guns went silent by decision, not depletion. At 31 minutes and 12 seconds, every human firing solution cleared in the same breath. Rail capacitors bled charge into sinks. Missile locks dropped. Across the fractured geometry of the battle space, Council crews waited for the next calculation and did not receive it. Instead, a transmission unfolded outward from the Titan, riding military bands, civilian relays, and emergency channels until it filled the system. The image was unadorned. The same human officer from first contact, framed identically, posture unchanged. No triumph, no threat cadence. "This engagement is paused," they said. "All escalation has ceased. Council commanders prepared for demands." None arrived. "Are broadcasting under interstellar law," the officer continued. Data panes opened beside them, stark and readable. Definitions appeared first, then thresholds. "The practice of chattel slavery is prohibited, effective immediately. Any vessel or installation engaged in the transport, ownership, or processing of sentient beings is designated a criminal enterprise." Across Council hulls, internal systems flared as registry codes lit red. Cargo holds long treated as routine appeared on tactical overlays as liabilities. Manifests reclassified themselves without argument. "Second," the officer said, "surrender is protected. Any ship that powers down offensive systems, transmits standard surrender codes, and holds position will not be fired upon. Boarding will be conducted only to secure weapons and render aid. We do not kill prisoners." The line repeated across channels, clipped and final. Human targeting enforced it in real time. Green markers spread as Council ships powered down, some cautiously, some with visible relief. Human fire control excluded them instantly, even when it cost optimal angles against remaining hostile targets. Third, the officer said, there will be trials. The word carried weight without volume. Command authority does not exempt individuals from accountability. Evidence has been recorded. Jurisdiction will be asserted. Sentences will be imposed by courts, not fleets. A council legal attaché attempted to interrupt, invoking sovereignty and ancient accords. The transmission did not pause. Sovereignty does not extend to enslavement, the officer replied. Accords that permit it are void. Numbers scrolled beneath the image with unemotional clarity. Enslaved populations identified, 4.0 million. Vessels flagged for seizure, 284. Command personnel designated for detention pending trial, 1 to 76. Humanitarian transfer window, 72 hours. Human ships moved. Again, not toward targets, but toward survivors. Boarding craft launched in measured intervals, medics visible through viewports, weapon safeties engaged. Damage control drones stabilized compromised hulls and sealed ruptures. A human frigate adjusted thrust to shield a powerless council cruiser from drifting debris, altering course by fractions of a degree to absorb the impact itself. The officer concluded without emphasis. You mistook restraint for weakness, they said. This is restraint. The transmission ended. In the quiet that followed, the council confronted a reality it had never modeled. The battle had stopped, not because humanity could not continue, but because it had decided the killing was no longer justified. The law had arrived on the battlefield, and it was being enforced. The understanding came from those who had not fired a shot. Coalition observers, bound by treaty to watch and record, began reconciling what they had witnessed with archives that predated the Council's longest peace. As the law broadcast echoed and human ships shifted to rescue and control, analysts layered timelines, vectors, and logistics signatures until coincidence failed under the weight of alignment. Human movements were not reactive, they were anticipatory. Acceleration profiles from the opening minutes were overlaid with dormant navigation charts pulled from obsolete probe networks. The vectors matched corridors, mapped, abandoned, and quietly remapped over centuries. The disposition of 67 human ships across 2.6 million kilometers was not a scramble to meet contact. It was a standing lattice, balanced for coverage and response. They were already in position, a coalition tactician said, voice stripped of speculation. Sensor reconciliation confirmed it. Beneath civilian noise and background radiation, logistics nodes emerged like submerged structures revealed by a falling tide. Fuel depots hollowed into cometary bodies. Ammunition caches buried in dead moons. Maintenance docks masked as survey platforms and research stations. Carbon dating on the oldest installations forced recalibration after recalibration, before the numbers were accepted. 214 years. Some nodes were older still, prepared long before. The phrase circulated through encrypted coalition channels. Never, transmitted toward Council space. This knowledge was not leverage, it was orientation. Human doctrine files, long dismissed as theoretical exercises from a minor polity, snapped into focus. Kinetic weapons were not nostalgia, they were logistics. Slugs could be fabricated anywhere with mass and time. Armor could be repaired without exotic fields. Crews could be conditioned under sustained acceleration until 12G was survivable. Then routine. Human fleets were not optimized for decisive wars measured in days. They were optimized for enforcement campaigns measured in decades. A coalition. Historian pulled a sealed record from a century earlier. A peripheral system that had gone dark after reporting an unclassifiable hostile. The Council had attributed the loss to internal collapse. The residue, re-examined now, showed absorption curves and vector geometries that looked uncomfortably familiar. They've been enforcing this quietly, someone said. Across margins, no one watched. The implications settled heavily. Humanity had not been hiding. It had been curating outcomes, allowing expansion until a line was crossed, waiting until evidence could be shown in numbers rather than declarations. The law broadcast had not been improvised under fire. It was a template, refined, tested, and held until needed. Coalition simulations branched and collapsed. In every credible escalation path, human fleets did not shatter. They adjusted, pre-positioned. Forces closed predictable choke points. Logistics outran attrition. Even defeat scenarios terminated not in annihilation, but in controlled withdrawal and renewed enforcement elsewhere. In the drifting council wreckage, survivors struggled to understand how authority had failed so completely. In coalition space, the question was colder and clearer. If humanity had prepared for centuries, then this engagement was not the beginning of a war. It was the moment the galaxy noticed a policy that had already been in effect. Neutralization proceeded without announcement. Human command reclassified. The remaining council hulls in seconds, hostile, surrendered, undecided, and acted only on the first. The distinction was absolute. Green-marked ships were removed from every firing solution, even when they drifted across optimal lines. Red-marked ones received no further warnings. Missile bays opened across the human lattice. Launches followed in disciplined waves, hundreds, of signatures blooming and fading as guidance systems shifted between hot burn and cold coast. The missiles did not converge on a single point. They flowed, dividing and recombining, occupying volumes of Space Council doctrine had never treated, as lethal at the same time. Point defenses engaged reflexively and failed methodically. Interceptors chased loud decoys, while real warheads slid through blind arcs, created by panicked maneuvering and overlapping shields. At 6,100 kilometers, a council cruiser died with engines, firing, hull fractured by kinetic impact and internal overpressure. At 5,700, another lost power and rolled helplessly, broadcasting surrender codes seconds too late to cancel inbound fire already committed by logic gates that did not negotiate. Human systems logged the loss and adjusted nothing. The cascade began. Council. Captains watched their tactical displays bleed red and made choices in isolation, cut off from command authority that no longer existed. Some powered down immediately, transmitting surrender on every channel they could access. Human systems acknowledged them within milliseconds, flipping markers from red to green as missiles peeled away mid-course and retargeted without hesitation. Others hesitated, hoping to survive unnoticed. They did not. Surrender cascade. The phenomenon propagated faster than any broadcast. Crews observed neighboring hulls, survived surrender exactly as promised, and acted accordingly. At 22 minutes into the phase, surrendered ships outnumbered hostile ones 2-1. At 37 minutes, 4-1. Boarding operations followed behind the missile waves, not as spectacle, but as process. Human cutters approached disabled hulls at controlled relative velocities, grappling points locking with mechanical certainty. Breach teams moved in pairs, weapons slung low, medics between them. Resistance was sporadic and brief. When it appeared, teams did not escalate. They sealed bulkheads, vented compartments, waited. Gravity and air resolved what bravado could not. Do not fire on green. The directive pulsed constantly across human channels. It was obeyed even when surrendered ships drifted into ideal firing geometry against still hostile targets. Gunners adjusted, sacrificing efficiency to preserve separation. The choice slowed the operation by minutes. No objections were logged. At 41 minutes, a council carrier attempted a mass launch, dumping strike craft in a last attempt to overwhelm defenses through saturation. Human response was immediate and impersonal. Defensive grids engaged not to annihilate, but to shape space. Electromagnetic pulses fired in patterned bursts, frying guidance systems without rupturing cockpits. Hundreds of fighters tumbled powerless, pilots alive, instruments dead. Automated recovery beacons activated from the wreckage as human traffic. Control began assigning lanes before the last craft stopped spinning. Another cluster of heavy cruisers tried to form a defensive ring around a crippled logistics tender, their movements tight and emotional rather than calculated. Human analysis flagged the maneuver in under a second. Missile fire softened the ring just enough. Railguns punched precise holes through power cores, avoiding secondary detonations. The tender went dark, without rupture. Boarding teams secured it and immediately began evacuating non-combatants from its holds. Throughout the phase, the Titan held central position, its mass anchoring the geometry. Railguns fired sparingly now, each shot deliberate, removing ships that threatened to destabilize surrender zones or endanger boarded hulls. Ammunition tallies updated in clean columns. Missiles expended 312, railgun rounds 18 additional, nuclear charges 0 in this phase. Human losses remained unchanged. Council resistance collapsed unevenly. Some captains fired until emitters overheated, or hulls failed under cumulative stress. Others cut power in silence, their surrender codes arriving without words. Human systems entreated them identically. Green markers spread until red became rare. At 69 minutes, the final organized hostile formation dissolved, its remaining ships powering down within a span of 30 seconds. The battlespace did not erupt in celebration. It simply went quiet. Hundreds of council hulls drifted in ordered clusters, weapons cold, damage reports queued, crews waiting. Human ships moved among them with methodical care. Repair drones stabilized. Compromised atmospheres. Traffic corridors were established to prevent collision. Boarding tallies finalized. Prisoners secured 4.0 million. Injured, treated 436,000. Fatalities ceased entirely once the last hostile marker disappeared. A council officer aboard a surrendered cruiser watched a human frigate alter course by fractions of a degree to shield their powerless hull from drifting debris, and felt something settle where certainty had once lived. Not relief, not fear, recognition. The fleet had not been destroyed, it had been dismantled, decision by decision, vector by vector, until fighting no longer made sense. Human command logged neutralization complete and transitioned fully to humanitarian and legal operations. The violence ended not with annihilation or exhaustion, but with the quiet certainty that there was nothing left to contest. Mercy arrived as procedure, not spectacle. Human cutters docked with surrendered hulls according to a queue that ignored rank and favored need. Atmospheres were stabilized first, then gravity, then medical access. Injured council crew were triaged without comment, species tags flashing briefly before dissolving into the same priority schema. Analgesics flowed, fractures were set, hemorrhage counters dropped to 0. The work was fast, practiced, and conspicuously. Indifferent to uniforms, no reprisals. The directive propagated with the same authority as a firing order. Human Marines escorted prisoners with weapons slung low, restraints applied only where resistance had already occurred. Those who complied walked unbound. Those who did not were isolated, recorded, and transferred without raised voices. Every interaction generated data, biometrics, testimony, command lineage, fed into a legal system already running at scale. Detention habitats unfolded from cargo holds, modular and sterile. Food met dietary requirements calculated down to trace elements. Translators rendered instructions in neutral cadence. Prisoner counts stabilized at 4.0 million. Fatalities did not increase. The numbers mattered, and the humans treated them like commitments. Across the system, civilian traffic resumed under human advisories. Relief convoys arrived on vectors cleared hours earlier, bearing markings from worlds that had never publicly aligned with Earth. Coalition observers watched the manifests populate and recognized the shift. Neighboring systems were not waiting for invitations, they were defecting. Declarations arrived in batches. Suspension of council tribute. Opening of ports to human oversight. Requests for arbitration under the statutes broadcast during the battle. Political gravity shifted not with speeches, but with filings and signatures, each time-stamped and verified. We accept these terms. The phrase repeated across multiple channels, identical wording traced back to the law template. Analysts flagged mimetic adoption. Human command did not respond. Trials were scheduled before the last boarding action completed. Jurisdiction packets listed charges with unemotional clarity. Enslavement, unlawful processing, command responsibility. Evidence hashes linked to censor. Logs and sworn testimony collected in real time. Command personnel flagged earlier, 176 individuals, were separated and transferred under guard that neither tightened when they struggled nor softened when they pleaded. The guards had heard both before. An outer system governor attempted to negotiate amnesty in exchange for immediate realignment. The reply came from a legal officer, not a commander. Alignment does not erase crimes, they said. The channel closed. Inside the habitats, rumors moved faster than fear. Crews compared treatment. They noticed surrender worked exactly as promised. They noticed no one was spaced, no compartments flooded, no reprisals taken for insults shouted in panic. The lesson settled unevenly, then held. At 96 hours, the first liberated populations transferred off seized vessels. Families stepped into gravity they had not chosen. Blinking under lights calibrated for comfort rather than efficiency. Human medics stood aside as civilian agencies took over, their role complete. The Titan remained on station, scarred armor patched with clean plates that did not hide the damage. Its commander filed a final operational note. Force applied. Compliance achieved. Mercy sustained. In distant systems, leaders weighed the cost of defiance against the evidence streaming through every relay. The choice was no longer abstract. Humanity had not conquered territory. It had offered an order, and demonstrated, with meticulous restraint, what followed when that order was accepted. The quiet returned too quickly to be trusted. Wreckage fields stabilized into predictable orbits. Traffic lanes reopened under human advisories. Trial schedules propagated with the same priority once reserved for firing solutions. From a distance, the system looked orderly again, as if violence had been a temporary distortion rather than a defining act. Human sensors did not relax. Deep-range arrays continued to sweep beyond the rim, baselines stretched across millions of kilometers, listening for patterns that did not belong. At 1:21 hours post-engagement, one array returned a signal that failed classification on every pass. It was faint, persistent, and wrong. Not a fleet, not a probe. A pressure in space-time that suggested movement without conventional drives. Analysts reran the data. The anomaly remained. The source lay beyond mapped space, more than 40,000 astronomical units out, approaching on a vector that ignored jump corridors entirely. Mass estimates fluctuated wildly, as if the object resisted measurement. Emission fragments matched partial records pulled from sealed archives. Studies of civilizations that had vanished so completely, their names survived only as footnotes and warnings. Exterminator. Signature. Human command convened without alarms or ceremony. No broadcasts interrupted relief operations. The information moved through channels that had existed long before contact with the Council. Contingency headers unlocked. Timelines populated. The numbers were not comforting, but they were familiar. A coalition observer, cleared under emergency protocol, asked a single question across a secure link. Is this connected to the Council's defeat? The reply was immediate and measured. No, the human officer said. It predates it. Meaning the Council had never been the final problem. The Titan adjusted station by a fraction of a degree, aligning long-range sensors with the incoming anomaly. Around it, human ships mirrored the movement without instruction, geometry settling into a configuration older than Council charts. Ammunition tallies updated, training rotations shifted. Messages were sent to systems that had not yet chosen a side, carrying no threats, only data. Beyond the rim, something ancient continued its approach, indifferent to law, mercy, or surrender. Its velocity did not change. Its signal did not waver. Humanity watched it with the same calm it had shown an empire. Then it began doing the math again.